Great games don't always come out in great shape. Sometimes they come out on the wrong foot, or without clothes, or even a face. And if you've played games, then you know that this is pretty damn common. Sometimes multiple games a year come out in a less than desirable state. So today I'm looking back at 11 of the most hyped and anticipated games that underwent catastrophically bad launches that, in the end, some of which came out okay. So buckle the f*** up because we have a lot to cover. First up, number 11, Diablo 3. For over a decade, gamers around the planet eagerly awaited the follow-up to one of the most beloved RPGs, Diablo 2, only to boot it up and be greeted with this wonderful thing. Many players took a week off to hack and slash away from showering to instead go toe-to-hoof with Diablo himself. That is, if they could actually get into the game. As it would turn out, the influx of excited gamers was too much for Blizzard servers, resulting in this nightmarishly iconic era screen. Honestly, it was kind of like a hug of death if you want to put a wholesome spin on it. On the other hand, players who were lucky enough to get in the game were instead greeted with a slew of game-breaking bugs. Bugs like equipping a specific character with a shield could crash the game, kicking you from the server, only to start it back up and be met with this oh-so-welcoming go f*** yourself screen. Better luck next time, loser. If millions of players trying to play Diablo 3 was the hug of death to Blizzard servers, then that Era 37 code was a chap-lipped kiss in return that absolutely no one wanted. But the game's problems weren't just technical. There was also some hot controversy surrounding Diablo 3's in-game auction house, a place where players could sell and buy gear in-game using that real-life moolah. Really, that's all fine and dandy if that's how you want to spend your weekly allowance. However, things started looking a little shifty as players approached the end game where there was a massive difficulty spike and a lack of good gear to buff players to handle it. But wouldn't you know, the auction house was ripe with that special epic gear to buy with the IRL dough. It threw some serious shade at Blizzard's in-game marketplace as players felt coaxed to spend more money in order to better equip themselves for the late-game stuff. The ye old pay-to-win conundrum in hell. The launch was a big old barrage of bad press for a game people had waited years for. Still, in the long run, Blizzard has addressed a lot of the game's issues, including shutting down the auction house. Instead, they've turned it around with a loot and progression system that's so great that devs like Bungie have worked with Blizzard to attempt emulating it. And despite its hellish launch, Diablo 3 is one of the best-selling PC games of all time, not to mention all the consoles it's been ported to, and retains a pretty high player count. Number 10, Battlefield 4, which was more like a minefield of problems. At launch, Battlefield 4 had some major issues, most prominently very frequent crashes across all platforms, along with inconsistent frame rates and collision issues. Oh yeah, and that one bug that would one-shot kill players. It was so bad that EA halted development on both Mirror's Edge and Star Wars Battlefront until Battlefield 4 was properly working. The game's terrible launch didn't just come with the obligatory internet berating, that's inevitable. No, what happened next was almost as bad. One after the other, several legal firms began to investigate EA on the account for not properly informing its investors of the game's horrible state, which was in violation of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. Ultimately, it was determined that the investors weren't misled, and the case was dropped. Now, Battlefield 4 is considered one of the best in the series, and the franchise has maintained a good track record ever since. Number 9, Assassin's Creed Unity. In the almost yearly mill of Assassin's Creed games, things had been going pretty alright for the franchise between its first 6 installments. Then Unity happened. While on the surface it was a shiny and pretty looking next-gen Assassin's Creed game, under the hood it was missing some things, very obvious things. Now, it's important to mention that the whole face glitch thing was addressed in a day one patch, but that doesn't mean that patch fixed everything, nor did it erase what we saw from our brains. Players would fall through the ground, get stuck in the environment, NPCs would appear and disappear, and its multiplayer, one of the game's major selling points, barely functioned. The whole ordeal resulted in many customers eligible to pursue legal action against Ubisoft for being misled about the state of the game. More like Assassin's Creed Disunity. In response, Ubisoft halted sales of the game's Season Pass, making DLC free, and as a compensation for those who bought its Season Pass, issued a free Ubisoft game, but in return for accepting the offer, forfeited their right to sue Ubisoft. On the positive side, Unity is often regarded today for still being a pretty good Assassin's Creed game, just one plagued with technical problems. Furthermore, its issues impacted its follow-up game, Syndicate, which resulted in Ubisoft taking a break from its annual releases to actually spend some time on the franchise. Number 8, the Master Chief Collection. This big time capsule of a collection is pretty damn impressive for managing to pack in 4 Halo games, all of which was kind of like a magical thing, just having to boot them up and play any of them at any moment. Bet you the multiplayer was really good too. It wasn't. One of Halo's most core-defining traits was completely and utterly busted. Getting into a game could take upwards to 10 minutes if at all. And if you were lucky enough to get into a game, the teams were often lopsided, and when it was over, the whole boring process would start all over again, making you say, F it, I'm pulling out the OG Xbox Cinder Block and going back to LAN parties. As an apology, Microsoft gave players a free month of Xbox Live Gold and Halo 3 ODST for free. These days, it's kind of a miracle to see how 343 Industries has managed to turn the Master Chief Collection around. Not only is all the multiplayer nonsense a thing of the past, it continues to get support with the addition of other games in the series like Halo Reach. And then in 2019, it was released for Windows, followed with crossplay, and has also received a massive facelift on the Xbox Series consoles, enabling 120 frames per second and 4K resolution support. Damn Skippy. Number 7, Batman Arkham Knight. What a good game. That is, if you bought it on consoles. For PC users, it was a totally different experience. While console players were parading around Gotham in a giant slick-ass Batmobile, those who bought it on PC could barely get the thing running. It was plagued with terribly inconsistent frame rates, bugs galore, and frequent crashes. The fiasco was so bad that WB Interactive issued refunds and suspended sales of the PC version until it met its intended quality standard. The game wouldn't be for sale for PC until October 2015, nearly 4 months after its initial launch. Today, it looks pretty damn good on PC and is now a great game on all platforms. Number 6, No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky E3 2014 reveal trailer is simply unforgettable. The single take of a player transitioning from a populated planet into outer space, zipping through galactic dogfights, then onto other planets, and back into space again was jaw-dropping. It skyrocketed to one of the most anticipated games at the time. But then, a week before its launch, a leaked copy of the game found its way on eBay where someone purchased it for $1,250. I hope they got what they wanted. They didn't. After Mr. Expendable Dollars got his copy, he shared gameplay online to reveal to the world that the game wasn't exactly as dazzling as the trailer had let on. Instead, it was desolate, sparse, and lonely. And very quickly, all that hype and excitement began to deflate. Additionally, the game was riddled with bug and performance issues. And most infamously, though the game was advertised as a multiplayer game, when 2 players managed to actually meet up on the same planet at the same location, they weren't even able to see each other. I think something to consider when looking at this whole No Man's Sky fiasco is that it was still a hugely ambitious game being developed by an incredibly small studio, and while there was bugs at launch, it wasn't outright broken, and yet it still was massively impressive for what they managed to pull off back then. I think if there's any point of criticism, it really should be owed all to its advertising, which definitely has skewed people's expectations. Ultimately, No Man's Sky's true legacy has been its comeback story. Constant updates and content have led to a happier player base and even some awards for developer Hello Games. Number 5, Star Wars Battlefront 2, which should have been named Star Wars Casino Front. The game faced some serious controversy at launch due to its aggressively ham-fisted implementation of microtransactions. Most specifically, its loot boxes, which gave players like Mr. Expendable Dollars the chance to fork up real-life cash in return for some extra advantages in-game. The ye old pay-to-win conundrum in space.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
It's important to mention these problems were before its launch, and during the open beta phase, it was bad enough that EA made the choice to remove microtransactions before the game came out, but Sadly, the damage had been done and it severely hurt the game's public image. Still, a lot of the game's progression systems were still very broken, with some players having to grind for 40 hours in order to unlock certain characters like Darth Vader. Even for players who spent $80 on the deluxe edition of the game didn't have immediate access to the franchise's main characters, like Darth Vader. It caused such a stir that the Belgian gambling regulator conducted an investigation to determine whether the game's loot boxes constituted as gambling. Then the Dutch Gambling Commission got involved, then Hawaii, and then Singapore, and then Australia. Basically everyone, and literally their mothers, started getting involved. By the end of 2017, EA had lost $3 billion in stock value since the game's launch, and have since dramatically reworked the game's progression systems and continued to release a substantial amount of good content for free. Probably one of the most unfortunate things that happened to this game is that its campaign, which was very well received by critics, got completely overshadowed by all the controversy surrounding its microtransactions, so if you have a chance, give it a shot. Number 4, Mass Effect Andromeda. Filling the shoes and continuing this franchise in any capacity was bound to be a daunting feat, and expectations were gonna be high. And, well, what came out wasn't exactly what I'm sure a lot of fans were hoping for. It wasn't bad, it wasn't great, it was worse, it was okay and forgettable. For a franchise that's established itself for being narratively complex, ripe with characters featuring an incredible amount of depth, this game was far from any of that. Andromeda was a cardboard cutout equivalent to its franchise, and I mean literally, those faces were like cardboard.
Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything.
Oh, and its stiff execution wasn't its only problem. I bet you can't guess what else. Come on. That's right. Yep. It was buggy. Didn't see that one coming, did ya? Between its cardboard characters, less than thrilling objectives, and, of course, broken nature, it left a pretty bad taste in the mouths of many Mass Effect fans. The game has since been fixed, but probably most amazing in my opinion is that they actually updated the faces. This game, unlike many others on the list, didn't have anything dramatic happen to it, like being pulled from storefronts or have big apologies issued. Instead, the world just kind of sort of moved on. Now you're probably waiting for the positive flip, but in this case, the best thing that happened is that the developers just kind of let the franchise alone for a bit. Now, that to me is the positive outcome. Any sign that developers are listening to us, the players, even if that means halting a franchise we love due in part to our opinions on something, that's a good sign. I think that's a good sign. Anyway, BioWare had something else to work on in the meantime anyways, a new IP in fact, and it's also the next one on our list. Move over, Destiny, there's another looter shooter rootin' and tootin' in these here parts. At least that's what BioWare seemed to had hoped for with Anthem. It was its big leap into the games as service style shared world multiplayer game. And honestly, it was a pretty good leap. Anthem had a beautiful world to explore, characters in the opening segments that rang true to BioWare's signature characters and writing, and combat that genuinely kicked ass. But all of that began to wear quite thin once you actually really started to play the game, which was empty, repetitive, boring, and, drumroll please, buggy. And for God's sakes, those damn loading screens. The game was hyped to high heaven, even getting District 9 director Neil Blomkamp to make a live-action trailer as a part of its marketing campaign, which, by the way, I would watch the shit out of that movie. God, I love Neil Blomkamp. Damn. This game was supposed to be nothing short of a huge deal, but it wasn't long after its launch that its player base hurled itself right off a cliff. Nonetheless, BioWare still seems committed to supporting it, announcing that they plan to reinvent the core gameplay for the long term, years to the future. Number 2, Fallout 76, which, just like Anthem, was Bethesda's first big step into turning the beloved Fallout franchise into a shared world multiplayer game. Now, if there's two things Bethesda is most well known for, it's for its story-rich worlds, dense with branching storylines and lively NPCs. The second thing would be bugs. The game-breaking kind.
I read on the internet that our games have had a few bugs.
Fallout 76 delivered only on one of those things, and no, I'm not talking about the lively part. In fact, there was little to no life in the game at all because there were no NPCs, only other players and the monsters of the wasteland. But there were a ton of bugs, so at least Bethesda stuck to one of its trademarks. Really though, the game thought to transition Fallout into an online game with your friends left it very much to other players to make it feel alive, but even that didn't always work properly. The game was panned negatively for all of these reasons, but the discourse didn't just stop there. Players who pre-ordered the Power Armor Special Edition were expecting to get a canvas duffel bag, but instead received a very cheap nylon bag. To add insult to injury, online influencers were given a nice canvas rucksack. Not the duffel bag, but still, it pissed fans off even more. Good news, at least, there's now NPCs in the game, and it's on Game Pass, making the game more widely playable while it gets consistent updates and support. We have made it to number 1, and here's a game that I bet you've never heard of before. Cyberpunk 2077, which was initially teased all the way back in 2012, and then again with a cinematic trailer the following year, ending with "coming when it's ready." Over the course of the next 8 years leading up to its release, the game went dormant, suddenly reappeared, got Keanu Reeves, and underwent several delays before actually finally really coming out. On PC, the game seemed to look great, and yeah, it's got bugs, nothing that people shouldn't be too surprised about, but other concerns began to arise leading up to its launch. One, developer CD Projekt Red issued an embargo that prohibited the press from using its own gameplay in video reviews. Instead, the developer provided its own gameplay. Number 2, the press was only allowed PC codes, not console copies. Huh, that's weird. I wonder, well, oh my god. Suddenly, 8 years of hype and anticipation fueled by a lengthy marketing campaign, countless preview streams, and endless promotion didn't just deflate overnight, it imploded. CD Projekt Red released a statement on issuing refunds for the game. Eventually, Cyberpunk 2077 was pulled from the PlayStation Store altogether, and as of January 11th, 2021, the day in which this is being recorded, is still not available to purchase. CD Projekt Red's stock plummeted by 9.4% following Cyberpunk 2077's release, and investors are seeking legal action towards the developer, claiming it made fraudulent claims to the state of the game and misled investors. Still, the game sold 13 million copies, which is astronomically good, making it one of the most successful RPG launches ever. And some players are still enjoying the shit out of it, so yeah. While it's too soon to comment on what the future will hold for Cyberpunk 2077, it's important to remember that CDPR's last game, The Witcher 3, wasn't perfect either, but improved over time. CDPR also promises big patches are on their way, as well as some free DLC. To be totally transparent, I didn't make this video to feel like I was reopening old wounds of games or developers from yesteryear, but I do think it's important to go back and look at some of these games, see where they started, where they are now, and how some of their developers have steered their ships in the process. I find that super fascinating. Now, I'm sure there's a few shows I missed putting on this list, so feel free to drop them in the comments below. And also, if you're still here, thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. If there's any kind of video you want me to make or just want to ask me a question, also leave those in the comments. I read all of them, and yes, I mean all of them. Alright, thanks for being here. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram, whatever your heart desires. That's Megatron. Just so you know. There she is. Okay. See ya.